They thought it was just a training exercise, a dog following commands. But when Coda, a stubborn German shepherd, broke every rule and refused to turn back, what he uncovered in the forest stopped an entire town in its tracks. A missing boy, a buried lie, and a truth no one else could find. Was it instinct or something divine? Because of one dog's faithfulness, a grieving mother found peace, and justice rose from the ground beneath their feet. Maybe miracles don't always come with wings. Sometimes they come with fur and a nose that refuses to give up. If you believe God still sends silent angels to this world, share this story. Leave a comment to honor Coda's mission. Subscribe for more true stories of courage and compassion. And if you believe in the power of faith over fear, type amen in the comments, and may God bless everyone watching. The wind moved in slow, deliberate spirals through the towering pines of Pine Grove National Forest, rustling amber leaves across the worn path just east of Ashfield, Colorado. It was early autumn, and the first hints of frost had begun to whisper on the ground. The air was dry and crisp, hanging with a rich scent of pine sap and moss, while the early morning sun filtered through a veil of mist, casting a soft, diffused light that painted every tree trunk in silver. Officer Emily Graves stood near the rear bumper of the department SUV, adjusting the search vest on her partner, Coda. At 32, Emily bore the sharp, clean composure of someone who thrived on discipline and quiet resolve. Tall and lean, she wore her uniform like armor, every button aligned, every crease razor-sharp. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back in a utilitarian bun, and there was a stillness to her pale blue eyes that hinted at something older than her years. Emily had once been a firefighter in Fort Collins until a warehouse collapse ended her career there and killed her younger brother, Liam, who was trapped inside with her. The trauma had muted her spirit for years. K-9 work, she would later say, gave her a purpose that fire had taken away. Coda, her German shepherd, stood rigid with anticipation, his intelligent amber eyes flicking toward the trees as if he already knew something Emily didn't. At 5 years old, he was all muscle and focus, coat thick, sable-toned with patches of golden fur that caught the sun. Most dogs wagged their tails when excited. Coda's tail barely moved. He was a sentinel, not a greeter. Once part of a military working dog program, he had been deemed too disobedient for the field, prone to veering off from instruction if he sensed something worth chasing. But Emily had chosen him for that very reason. A low whistle broke through the trees. Officer Travis Hale stepped toward them, clipboard in hand. Travis was new to the Ashfield Police Department, mid-30s, square-jawed, with the kind of short blonde haircut that never seemed to shift, even in the wind. His uniform was pristine, almost suspiciously neat, and he had a sharp-edged skepticism about him, especially toward Coda. He made no attempt to hide it. "You sure your wonder dog's ready for this?" Travis asked, his voice cool, not unkind but loaded with implication. Emily didn't flinch. "He's ready. Just don't want to waste the team's time if he decides to chase a squirrel again." She didn't answer. Instead, she clipped the lead to Coda's harness and looked down at him. "We've got this, don't we?" Coda gave a quiet huff and stared forward. Sergeant Wallace gathered the K-9 unit near the SUV, unfolding a map on the hood. Wallace was a big man, early 50s, former Marine, weathered skin, and thick mustache that matched the peppery gray of his hair. His presence commanded attention not by yelling, but by sheer gravity. He respected rules, order, and timing to the second. 6 cent pads buried across this quadrant, Wallace barked, tapping the map. Standard remains training, some shallow, some deep. You know the drill. Work your grids, don't rush, and document everything. Mercer Graves, you're in Sector C. Emily gave a short nod, and Wallace's gaze lingered on Coda with clear doubt. He hadn't trusted the pairing from day one. The search began with mechanical efficiency. Emily walked in a slow zigzag across the designated zone, letting Coda work the wind. His movements were methodical, calculated. They'd located 2 scent pads within the first 20 minutes, each one marked by Coda's signature sit and stare. She rewarded him quietly, then moved on. But at minute 35, everything changed. Coda stopped. His ears swiveled. His nose lifted. Then, without warning, he veered sharply to the left, away from the grid. "Coda, no," Emily said sharply, signaling for him to return. "This way." He didn't listen. Instead, Coda darted toward a dense wall of ferns and low-hanging brush just beyond the quadrant. His body lowered to the ground as he pushed through the thicket like a ghost in uniform. "Coda!" Emily hissed and jogged after him. Behind her, she could already hear Travis on the radio. "Graves' dog has broken formation." Again. Emily shoved through the undergrowth, heart pounding, not from fear but something else. Coda had never fully disobeyed unless he was certain. She found him 50 yards off the designated trail, in a hollow shaded by thick pine branches, where the ground felt unnaturally soft beneath her boots. Coda was pawing at the soil with increasing urgency. Before she could call him off, a voice thundered behind her. "Officer Graves." She turned to see Sergeant Wallace emerging from the trees, Travis just a few steps behind. Wallace's face was red from exertion or anger, likely both. "Call your dog off now," he ordered. "This is a controlled environment. We're not here to let your dog dig holes where he pleases." Emily stood, voice steady. "Sir, he's signaling. That's a clear alert. This isn't the grid. We don't even have scent pads in this area." "I know," Emily said quietly, "but he's trying to tell us something." Wallace growled. "You want to gamble your career on that mutt's whim?" Coda gave a sharp whine then, high-pitched, distressed. He returned to the same spot and dug harder, tossing clumps of earth behind him in sudden frenzy. Something about the sound, the sheer desperation of it, struck Wallace silent. For a long second, no one moved. Then Travis, frowning but curious, stepped forward and nudged the soil with his boot. "It's looser here than the surrounding ground," he muttered. Wallace exhaled like a punctured tire and finally said, "Get a shovel. Let's see what your dog's found this time." Emily didn't smile. She knelt beside Coda, resting her hand on his side as he panted softly, still trembling with intensity. "Good boy," she whispered. "We're listening." The shovel struck something soft beneath the fourth layer of earth. It wasn't the familiar thump of root or stone, but a dull resistance that sent a cold ripple through Emily Graves' spine. The sound was too organic, too still. She paused, her gloves damp with dirt and sweat, breath misting in the chill morning air that now felt heavier, more oppressive than when they first stepped into this part of Pine Grove. Coda had backed a few feet, tail stiff, eyes fixed, his body low to the ground like a sentry at a war memorial. He wasn't panting from exertion anymore, he was waiting. Sergeant Wallace stood above her, arms crossed tightly over his broad chest. The hard lines of his face were set, but his lips pressed thin betrayed the shift from frustration to concern. A few feet away, Officer Travis Hale knelt beside a younger man in a department-issued jacket. Noah Renshaw, the newest recruit in Ashfield PD's cadet program. Noah was barely 22, lanky with pale skin that hadn't yet toughened to sun and field work. His eyes, hazel, wide, and visibly rattled, followed every move Emily made. This was supposed to be a training exercise for him, a routine morning. Now he was clutching the handle of a spare shovel, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Emily pushed back another layer of soil, slowly, methodically, each movement more deliberate than the last. The scent shifted. Not strong, not yet, but it was there, faint decay, old cloth, dampness that clung to the nostrils. She held her breath as she reached down with gloved fingers and brushed away the last inch of dirt. Her hand froze. A hand. It was small, pale. The fingers were curled inward, locked in rigor mortis, partially covered by a thin layer of decomposed fabric. The wrist bone was visible where the skin had sloughed off, exposing the unforgiving truth of time and death. The surrounding dirt was darker, tinged by seepage. She didn't speak, only sat back slowly and exhaled in a shudder. Wallace stepped forward, silence stretched like wire between them. His jaw clenched as he looked down, then glanced at Coda. The dog was still frozen, not moving, ears flat and eyes locked on the grave like it owed him answers. "Get on the radio," Wallace said finally, voice low. "We need forensics, crime scene tape, and the coroner, now." This just turned into something else. Travis immediately stepped aside to call it in. His tone had lost the earlier sarcasm. Now it was clipped, professional, tight. Noah didn't move. Emily rose to her feet and turned to him. "You okay?" He nodded too quickly. Yeah. His voice faltered. "I've never seen a body. Not like that." She placed a firm hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You just did one of the most important things a cop can do. You stood still when it mattered." Noah nodded again, slower this time. As more officers arrived to cordon off the area, one among them moved with an unusual kind of slowness. Mariah Teague, a veteran officer with 28 years on the force, gray hair coiled tightly in a bun, eyes always carrying a flicker of grief just beneath her surface calm. She wasn't tall, but she held herself with a tired dignity, like someone who'd seen far too much and still chose to come to work. Mariah had lost her son 14 years ago. He'd been 17, just like the boy in the shallow grave. A missing person who was never found. That ghost never left her. Mariah didn't speak as she approached the site. She only stepped close enough to see the edge of the hand, now partially covered by a forensic tarp, and quietly turned her face away. One gloved hand lifted, brushing tears from her cheeks, and she walked back into the trees alone. No one stopped her. Forensic technician Arlo Benton arrived next, a wiry man in his 40s with sun-creased skin, thick glasses, and an encyclopedic memory for decomposition timelines. He spoke little but saw everything. He began photographing and marking the site with colored flags, muttering his initial observations into a voice recorder. Male adolescent. Partial exposure. 4 to 6 weeks. Possibly longer depending on elevation and burial depth. No insect activity at surface. Cooler climate likely slowed decay. Sergeant Wallace finally broke his long silence. "Officer Graves," he said, clearing his throat, "your dog was correct. I misjudged." Emily only nodded, not out of disrespect, but because there was nothing to be gained by saying more. Coda stood beside her now, calm, though his gaze still drifted back to the grave every few seconds. "Who trained that dog again?" Wallace asked after a beat. "Captain Greg Callahan, former Marine. Forensic K-9 specialist. He trained Coda for scent discrimination. Said he wasn't obedient enough for military, too independent. But he told me something the day I got him." She looked down at Coda with quiet pride. "He said, he won't follow orders, but he'll follow truth. You just have to trust him more than you trust the system." Noah stepped forward slightly, more confident now. "I want to transfer to the K-9 program," he said without ceremony. Wallace arched a brow. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Noah said. "Whatever that dog just did, I want to learn how to be part of that." Wallace nodded once, his expression unreadable. They stood in stillness a few more moments as the scene transformed. Yellow tape stretched between tree trunks, evidence markers lined the earth, and the quiet of the forest was now broken by shutter clicks and measured voices. But despite all the activity, the heart of the moment had already passed. It belonged to a dog who refused to obey, and a handler who dared to believe him. The first fingers of dusk had begun to stretch across the sky above Pine Grove, casting long shadows through the crime scene perimeter, now secured with yellow tape and humming with quiet tension. Floodlights had been brought in by mid-afternoon, and under their harsh glow, every branch, rock, and patch of disturbed soil took on a clinical, unnatural hue. The forest no longer whispered with peace, it buzzed with urgency. Behind the cordon, Emily Graves stood with her hands in her vest pockets, eyes locked on the body bag being zipped shut by the coroner's team. Coda sat at her side, ears perked but no longer anxious, his work for the moment complete. The forensic team had recovered several personal items from the shallow grave, among them a torn, faded blue backpack, caked in dirt and pine needles, its zippers rusted but still intact. Inside were remnants of a life suddenly cut off, a smashed cell phone, a dented water bottle, a crumpled energy bar wrapper, and the thing that pulled every voice into silence when it was held up, a student ID card from West Ridge High School, barely legible through the film of soil and time. Emily took the card gently from the gloved hand of Arlo Benton, the lead crime scene tech. Arlo, always calm, gave her a short nod of affirmation. The ID's photo was grainy, but the face on it, freckled, smiling, eyes full of mischief, was clear enough. Beneath the photo, Zachary Cole, grade 11. Emily exhaled slowly. Her mind rewound to the missing person bulletins plastered across local news sites 4 months ago. She hadn't been assigned to the case, but she remembered the face. Everyone did. Zachary's story had struck something deep in the Ashfield community. He was 17, a junior at West Ridge, a cross-country runner, known for climbing trees during lunch and volunteering at the animal shelter. His disappearance had stirred sympathy, rumors, and then, slowly, silence. Search parties had been organized in Crestwood Park, the place he was last seen heading for a solo hike, but nothing had turned up. After weeks, the media stopped reporting. The school held a vigil. The family began to disappear from public view. Coda let out a low whine and nudged her knee. "Yeah," Emily murmured, rubbing the thick fur behind his ears. "I remember him too." She stepped aside to make the hardest call of her day. Inside the command tent set up along the old forestry road, she found a moment of privacy. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and dialed the number written on the missing person report's last page. It rang twice. "Hello?" The voice was low, hesitant, and weary. "Mr. Cole? This is Officer Emily Graves from the Ashfield Police Department. I have some news regarding your son, Zachary." A sharp intake of breath echoed through the speaker, followed by a brittle silence. Then, "Is he?" Emily closed her eyes. "We found his remains, sir, in Pine Grove Forest." "I'm so sorry." The line didn't go dead, but it felt like it had. Several seconds passed before the voice returned. "You're sure it's him?" There was a student ID on the body, matching his name and school. "Forensics will confirm, but yes, sir. It's Zachary." A second voice joined the line in the background, quieter, female, trembling. "Who is it, James?" It was Tina Cole, Zachary's mother. Emily heard muffled cries, the kind that come from a place deeper than the lungs. She listened in respectful silence as Zachary's parents tried to find words. Then came the question no parent should ever have to ask. "Can we see him?" Emily's voice softened. "Yes, I can arrange that. But we may need a few hours for the coroner to prepare. We'll take care of everything. You don't need to rush." "We've been waiting 4 months," James Cole replied, his voice hollow. "We're not rushing. We're just finally going." As she hung up, the silence that followed felt different, heavier, rooted in finality. Outside, the investigative unit had begun cross-referencing missing persons reports again, hoping for connections. Arlo approached, holding the dirt-caked backpack now sealed in a transparent evidence bag. "There's more," he said, his tone neutral. Zippers were still shut. Inside we also found a folded trail map. "Guess where it's marked?" Emily blinked. "Crestwood." Arlo nodded, with a red circle and the words "solo hike" written on it. Someone wanted to be sure we believed he was there, not here. It wasn't just misdirection. It was a story being fed to them. An intentional narrative, set up like breadcrumbs leading to the wrong forest. As she absorbed the implication, Officer Travis Hale entered the tent, a tablet in hand. He was more subdued now, a quiet focus replacing his earlier skepticism. "You need to see this," he said, handing her the screen. A video played, an old local news broadcast from 4 months prior. It was an appeal by the Cole family, aired the week after Zachary's disappearance. On screen, Tina Cole sat on a folding chair at a community park, wind catching the hem of her cardigan. She was a slender woman, with weary eyes and tense shoulders, her curly chestnut hair pulled back with a trembling hand. She clutched a photo of her son to her chest like it was all that was holding her together. Her voice cracked in the video. "If anyone has seen him, even just a glimpse, even if it feels like nothing, please. Please help me find my son. I just need to know he's not cold, that he's not alone out there." The screen went dark. Emily set the tablet down gently. Coda had moved to her side again, silent but present. She reached down and rested her palm against his back, grounding herself. Outside the tent, the woods had grown darker, but something else had shifted. Zachary's name, once buried under leaves and forgetting, had returned. And now that it had, nothing would remain hidden for long. The morning fog had returned to Pine Grove, draping the forest in a damp hush that muted footsteps and cloaked the trees like smoke. Dew clung to every pine needle, and the scent of wet bark hung heavy in the air. The crime scene was still cordoned off with yellow tape, but the heart of the investigation had shifted from the grave to the forest floor that surrounded it. Evidence flags dotted the landscape like strange blooms, and the air buzzed with quiet movement as investigators swept through the brush. Emily Graves stood with her boots half buried in mud, her gloved hands resting on her hips as she watched Coda sniff along a narrow game trail just northeast of the original burial site. The German Shepherd was focused, his body low, tail stiff, ears flicked forward with absolute purpose. Emily knew that posture. It meant Coda was reading the world in invisible threads of scent, catching a story no one else could see. She didn't call him back. Not this time. Sergeant Wallace, however, had other thoughts. From the slope above, he called down, voice already bristling. "Graves, your dog's off pattern again. Get him back on a controlled loop." Emily turned just enough to respond, but kept her eyes on Coda. "He's working. Let him follow it." Wallace sighed and gestured toward a nearby officer to note the time and location. His tone hadn't lost its gruffness, but his earlier rigidity had thinned to reluctant observation. Coda had earned more than one concession over the past 24 hours. Beside Emily, Officer Travis Hale crouched, brushing aside pine needles with a gloved hand as he examined shallow impressions in the dirt, possibly old footprints, but too disturbed to be useful. Travis's demeanor had softened noticeably since the body's discovery. His sharp edges dulled, replaced by a kind of curious caution. He watched Coda with open interest now, not judgment. "I didn't get it at first," he muttered. "Why you'd trust him when he ignores everything he's taught. But he's not ignoring, he's choosing." Emily gave a small smile. "That's exactly it. Coda doesn't just react. He interprets." Travis straightened up, glancing sideways at her. "You ever wonder how he got that way? I mean, dogs are trained to follow, not to question." She exhaled slowly, eyes still following Coda's steady movement through the trees. "That's Greg Callahan's doing. He trained Coda in scent discrimination. Not just tracking, but interpretation. Said most dogs chase trails. Coda reads context." "Callahan," Travis repeated. "That the Marine guy?" Emily nodded. "Captain. Retired. Lost his nephew in a kidnapping case. Kid was buried alive, and they found him too late. After that, Callahan built a training program for dogs to find remains that no machine or human could trace. He trained Coda personally. Said he was different. Not disobedient, just too smart to follow rules blindly." "And the military passed on that?" Travis asked, raising an eyebrow. "They didn't want a dog who broke protocol," Emily said quietly. "But Callahan told me, this one will break every rule to save a life. The only question is, will you listen when he does?" Before Travis could reply, Coda stopped. Dead still. His nose was nearly touching the moss-covered base of a fallen tree, body frozen like stone. Then he sat. A slow, deliberate motion. Emily's heart jumped. That was his trained signal for significant evidence. She jogged forward, crouching beside him. "What do you have, partner?" Beneath the log, just barely visible through a layer of decomposing leaves and broken twigs, was a small strip of fabric, light blue, soaked at one end with a dark reddish-brown stain. Emily reached carefully with tweezers and lifted it into a sterile evidence bag. "A handkerchief," she murmured. "Blood-stained." Travis joined her, squinting. "Looks like lipstick, too." Coda didn't move. He was still alert, staring just beyond the log. Emily stood, letting him take the lead again. A few feet ahead, Coda's nose dipped toward the underbrush. He began circling slowly, then abruptly sat again. They found the second item just inside a shallow root bowl where a tree had fallen. A cigarette, lipstick still stained on the filter, barely covered by soil. Emily bagged it carefully. The evidence was old but intact, protected by the surrounding foliage. Travis let out a low whistle. That's 2 pieces of evidence your rule-breaking dog just handed us. Wallace finally made his way down the slope, flanked by crime scene photographer Lena Mendez, a small, intense woman in her late 30s with a quiet efficiency and a backpack full of labeled film rolls. Her dark hair was tied up in a practical knot, and her boots were already soaked with mud. She never said much, but her lens saw everything. She knelt beside the evidence flags and began capturing wide-angle shots before shifting to close-ups. These both matched the condition of the backpack, Lena noted. Same aging, same exposure level. These weren't dropped days ago. They've been here since Zachary. Wallace took the cigarette bag and stared at it for a long second. We get lucky and pull DNA, we might just have our suspect's trace. Assuming it's not Zachary's, Travis added. Emily shook her head. He didn't smoke. According to his school file, he ran track, asthma history as a kid. His mom confirmed, never touched a cigarette, and definitely not lipstick. Travis raised an eyebrow again. So now we have a third person at this scene? Emily met his gaze. Or a second besides Zachary. Male or female. We don't know yet. But whoever they are, they were close enough to share a smoke or leave a blood trail. Wallace exhaled. Okay, I'm officially not calling your dog disobedient anymore. Coda lay down at Emily's feet, tongue flicking out once, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He was done for now. As the sun began its descent through the trees, the forest seemed to draw back into silence again. But the quiet no longer felt indifferent. It felt like something watching, something waiting to speak again, if only someone like Coda would listen. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly in the air, not from anything recent, but from ashes long cooled and nearly lost beneath the layers of forest time. Pine Grove's canopy filtered the late afternoon light into dappled patches across the undergrowth, as if nature itself were reluctant to reveal too much at once. Emily Graves stepped carefully over the roots of a downed pine, Coda moving ahead of her with silent intent, his tail cutting low and steady through the air like a rudder on mission. The forest thinned just slightly ahead, opening into what looked like a shallow natural clearing, ringed by ferns and young saplings. Coda stopped at the edge, his nose twitching, and then proceeded forward in a slow, deliberate zigzag. Emily followed, boots crunching on a thin layer of scattered leaves and debris. Officer Travis Hale trailed behind, notebook in hand, his focus now fixed not on protocol, but on Coda's every move. Coda circled once, twice, then lowered his chest to the ground and gave a short, sharp bark. Emily's heart lifted into her throat. This is it. Before them lay a makeshift campsite, partially disguised with old brush and strategically scattered branches. At first glance, it could have passed as a hunter's forgotten fire pit, but closer inspection revealed more. Charcoal sat undisturbed in a circle of blackened rocks. Around it were discarded beer cans, torn snack wrappers, a crushed plastic cup with dried red residue, possibly sports drink, possibly something stronger. Emily knelt beside the circle and lifted a melted marshmallow stick, the charred end still sticky under her glove. Doesn't look abandoned for long, Travis murmured, crouching beside her. But someone tried to make it disappear. She nodded. Half-assed effort, like they left in a hurry. Coda had moved to the far edge of the site, ears twitching, nose low to the ground. Then he stopped beside a flat pile of stones. Not large, but too carefully arranged to be random. He gave one warning bark and pawed once at the stones. Travis stood. That look intentional to you? Emily approached and began gently removing the rocks. A few layers down, tucked inside a clear plastic zip bag, was a cell phone, screen cracked, battery bulging, but otherwise intact. The bag had shielded it from moisture. Someone had wanted it hidden, but not destroyed. Travis whistled low. Why not just smash it or dump it in the river? Emily studied the way it had been packed. Because they weren't sure. Maybe they thought they'd come back for it. Or maybe they panicked and buried it to buy time. They sealed the bag in an evidence container, tagged it, and radioed the command team for forensic analysis. While they waited for backup, Travis moved to the edge of the clearing, scanning the ground. Coda joined him briefly, sniffed once, and veered toward a patch of ground just beyond the fire pit, where the earth was damp and slightly indented. "What do you think, tire marks?" Travis asked. Emily walked over and squatted beside them. "Wide spacing. Deep impressions, but no tread pattern left. Probably an off-road set, high clearance. Jeep or a truck?" From behind them came the voice of Deputy Carla Monroe, a compact, wiry woman with sun-leathered skin and a voice like worn gravel. Carla had been with the department for nearly 2 decades, often assigned to rural surveillance. She carried herself like a hawk, sharp-eyed, precise, and always ready to dive when needed. "I used to see kids sneak into this part of Pine Grove during the summers," she said, arms crossed as she surveyed the site. "Always used the old logging road, back entrance by Route 14. You can get a lifted Jeep through if you know the right turns." "You think it's still drivable?" Travis asked. Carla nodded. "If you don't care about your suspension." Emily glanced at her. "Did you ever catch anyone back here?" Carla shrugged. "A few. No arrests. Usually just warnings. Beer, loud music, some trespassing. But last June, I did see a red Wrangler back here with 3 boys. I didn't write them up. Should've." Emily turned sharply. "You remember what day?" Carla thought for a moment. "Week after school let out. Friday, maybe. They looked nervous as hell. Said they were leaving anyway. Didn't think much of it. Can you describe any of them?" Tall one, pale, curly brown hair. Another was heavier, had a buzz cut, kind of mean eyes. The third barely spoke. Glasses, quiet type. Emily felt her jaw tighten. She turned to Travis, who was already typing a note on his tablet. "If this matches Zachary's friend group," she began. "It does," he replied. "I saw their photos in the missing person file. That's them." Just then, Coda let out a soft huff, signaling his work was done for now. Emily gave him a quick scratch behind the ears and whispered, "Good boy." He leaned into her touch with a small sigh. That night, back at her apartment, Emily sat on the edge of her bed with a pen in hand and her leather-bound field journal open across her lap. She'd started journaling again 3 years ago, the day she was paired with Coda, a habit recommended by Callahan. "Write what you see," he had told her. "Write what others overlook." She scribbled in neat, controlled lines. Day 2 of the scene. Coda found the campsite. Beer cans, fire pit, tire impressions. Evidence suggests presence of multiple people. Someone tried to erase this place, but didn't finish the job. Buried phone recovered, intact. Smelled like fear. They would have gotten away with it, if not for Coda. She looked over at him now, curled on the rug at the foot of her bed, his eyes closed but his ears still listening. Always listening. The fluorescent lights of St. Helena Regional Hospital hummed softly overhead, flickering slightly as a storm rolled over Ashfield. Thunder grumbled in the distance, vibrating faintly through the hospital's windows, and the smell of antiseptic hung thick in the halls. Night had fallen, but the ward remained active with the low shuffle of nurses' shoes and the distant beep of monitors. On the second floor, room 214 sat quiet, too quiet. Lauren Marks lay asleep beneath thin white sheets, a small bandage over her forehead and bruises blooming darkly along her jaw. She hadn't spoken much since being rescued. Trauma clung to her like a second skin. Outside the room, Shadow lay alert in the corridor, head resting on his paws but ears twitching at every sound. He was a 6-year-old German shepherd, broad-shouldered and heavy-coated, with striking black and tan markings and a scar across his left shoulder, a reminder of his military past. Shadow had served overseas as a tactical tracking dog, but his retirement had never dulled his instincts. He was a guardian in every cell. On the security feed, the cameras buzzed static for 2 seconds, barely noticeable. Then darkness. Every screen blinked out simultaneously. At the same moment, the hallway lights died. The hospital sank into silence, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Then came footsteps. Measured. Confident. 3 silhouettes moved through the emergency stairwell, 2 men in tactical black and 1 in civilian clothes. The leader was Reese Holleran, late 30s, with pale blue eyes and a shark's grin. He wore a hospital lab coat over a ballistic vest and carried a silenced pistol under his arm. Reese was known in certain circles as the janitor, not because he cleaned floors, but because he cleaned problems. The other two men, both carrying submachine guns, flanked him in formation. "This way," Reese said, voice low. "Room 214. No sound. No survivors." What they didn't account for was Shadow. The shepherd's head lifted. His eyes adjusted instantly to the dark. He stood, body rigid, and emitted a low, threatening growl that echoed through the corridor like a warning from the underworld. Reese paused just before turning the corner. "We've got company." Shadow lunged. The first attacker, a lean man with a shaved head and nervous hands, barely raised his weapon before Shadow collided with him. The shepherd struck center mass and knocked him to the floor, sending the firearm clattering. The man screamed once before Shadow's jaws clamped onto his arm with terrifying precision. The hallway erupted into chaos. Lauren stirred inside her room, woken by the noise. Her breath hitched in her throat as she scrambled from the bed, instinct taking over. Reese fired 2 shots down the corridor, both silenced, both missing their mark in the confusion. Shadow disengaged and darted toward the second attacker, weaving through shadows like a ghost. A bullet grazed his flank, shallow but bloody. The dog barely slowed. The second attacker went down with a grunt, dropping his weapon as Shadow slammed into his leg. A sickening crack followed as bone met force. He screamed, rolling sideways. Reese reached the door to room 214, slammed it open, and found Lauren crouched by the medical cabinet, holding a metal for pole like a spear. "You're a damn stubborn girl," he sneered. "Go to hell," she whispered. He raised the pistol. Then Shadow launched. This time, it was all teeth and fury. He struck Reese just as the gun fired, a wild shot that blew out the window behind Lauren. The two fell to the floor, Reese struggling beneath the growling, bleeding weight of 80 pounds of trained fury. Just down the hallway, a team of federal agents burst through the stairwell, tactical gear in place, weapons raised. The lead officer was Special Agent Dominic Mason, FBI. He was in his mid-40s, tall and athletic with a square jaw, dark skin, and tightly coiled hair just beginning to gray. Known for his calm under pressure, Mason had been monitoring the case quietly for weeks, waiting for jurisdiction to shift. Tonight it did. "Move. Federal agents." Mason's voice boomed as the team secured the hallway. Reese was pinned beneath Shadow, his arm torn and pistol kicked out of reach. The agents swept in and cuffed him while others subdued the 2 injured men. Inside room 214, Lauren trembled as Mason approached slowly, one hand extended, his voice gentle now. "You're safe. It's over." She didn't speak, only nodded slowly. Her eyes drifted to Shadow, who was now lying beside the wall, panting, the blood from his flank staining the sterile tile. Emily arrived minutes later, breathless, having just returned from the forensics lab. She dropped to her knees beside Shadow and pressed a gloved hand to his side, inspecting the wound. "It's shallow," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "You're all right, boy. You did good." Shadow licked her wrist in response. Mason surveyed the scene, then pulled Emily aside. "We've been tracking this internal network for months. Corrupt staff, fake paperwork, money trails from the medical examiner's office to a private contractor. Reese was the cleaner. When we saw him come back on site, we knew it was time." Emily nodded grimly. "He almost got her. But he didn't. Because of your dog." Outside, patrol cars were replaced by unmarked federal SUVs. The Ashfield PD had been quietly pulled off the case, too compromised, Mason had said. The investigation was now officially under the jurisdiction of the FBI and ATF. Deputy Carla Monroe stood beside the barricades with folded arms, eyes scanning the trees. She was off shift but had come anyway. "You know," she murmured to Travis, "if that dog had been human, they'd have given him a damn medal." Travis, face still pale from the blood on the walls, replied, "He doesn't need a medal. He's got Emily." Back inside the hospital, Lauren sat upright on the hospital bed, stitches above her brow, for pole beside her like a monument. Shadow lay beside her now, head in her lap, eyes half closed, breathing slow. "I don't know what I would have done without him," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Emily replied. Because he never would have left you. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the Ashfield courthouse as the arraignment began. Gray clouds loomed above the city like a warning, and the wind carried the scent of wet pavement and something heavier, like the end of something long buried. Inside courtroom 3B, tension pulsed like a heartbeat. Tyler Monroe stood at the defendant's table, dressed in a pressed suit too large for his broad shoulders. His jaw clenched tight, and though he stared ahead, he didn't meet anyone's eyes. His skin was pale, lips thin and unreadable. Beside him sat Ethan Brooks, leaner, jittery, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that darted too quickly between the lawyers and the gallery. Both wore the expression of boys who had played grown-up games and found themselves facing adult consequences. At the far end of the room sat Jake Harmon, smaller in frame, his shoulders hunched inward like he wished he could fold himself out of sight. Jake wore no suit, just a sweater and jeans, like he was still trying to believe this was all a misunderstanding. But his face was streaked with the aftermath of too many sleepless nights, and his hands twisted in his lap, trembling. Jake had confessed everything. The camping trip, the alcohol, the fight, Zachary's fall, and the hastily constructed lie. His statement had broken the case open. And though his name appeared on the same docket, the prosecutors had recommended leniency. Judge Carolyn Whitmore presided, a tall, silver-haired woman with commanding posture and steel-gray eyes that held no patience for arrogance. Her robe flowed around her like storm clouds. At 63, Whitmore was known in Ashfield as fair but unsparing, a judge who weighed remorse and responsibility with equal measure. The charges were read: manslaughter, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. When the prosecutor outlined how the campsite was hidden, the phone buried, and the car planted miles away to frame an innocent solo hike, no one in the courtroom breathed. And yet, despite the heaviness, there was a glimmer of resolve seated behind the gallery rail. Emily Graves sat with her back straight, Coda at her feet, head resting on her boots. His flank was bandaged from the hospital incident, but his eyes were bright, alert, and unshaken. He seemed to know that his work, his purpose, had meant something more than rules and orders. The courthouse had allowed his presence today as a gesture of honor, and no one questioned it. Next to Emily sat Greg Callahan, a tall, weathered man in his early 50s, with sun-creased skin and a limp in his right leg from an old field injury. His salt and pepper beard framed a mouth that rarely smiled, but his eyes softened when they rested on Coda. Greg had trained dozens of dogs across his military career, but only one had ever challenged his expectations. He leaned slightly toward Emily and whispered, "He did it. You both did. The hard way, but the right way." Emily gave a quiet nod. He never hesitated. Not once. Greg's gaze didn't leave Coda. That's the thing with the difficult ones. The ones who don't obey for obedience's sake. They're not disloyal, they're discerning. That kind of judgment can't be taught. It has to be trusted. The verdicts came down like the slow drop of a gavel. Tyler and Ethan were remanded without bail, each facing up to 15 years. Jake, tearful, was sentenced to 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service under strict supervision, in light of his cooperation. As he passed Emily outside the courtroom, he paused, his voice hoarse. "Can you tell his family I'm sorry?" he said. I didn't know how to stop it." Emily nodded once. "It's not my place to forgive, but your truth helped." Later that afternoon, back in the precinct, Coda was a celebrity. Local reporters crowded the front lawn. A camera team from Channel 5 News filmed a segment titled "Coda the Rule Breaker Who Found the Truth," featuring Emily and her partner. In the clip, Emily stood in uniform, one hand resting on Coda's harness as she answered questions with steady clarity. Her voice never rose above its usual measured tone, but her words carried. He didn't follow the search grid. He didn't follow orders. But he followed the truth. And that's what saved Zachary Cole from being forgotten forever. The town responded with rare warmth. A week later, Emily and Coda stood in the gymnasium of West Ridge High School, surrounded by rows of students in folding chairs. A banner hung across the stage, "K9 Heroes, Lessons in Loyalty and Instinct." In the front row sat Mrs. Langford, the school counselor, a sturdy woman with salt-colored hair and a comforting presence. She introduced Emily with a voice that shook once, only when she said Zachary's name. Emily spoke briefly about working with Coda, how he was once considered untrainable, how he'd been rejected from military duty, and how his independence was his greatest gift. Behind her, a slideshow played, Coda by the river, Coda at the search site, Coda in the hospital beside a girl he'd saved. The students sat silent, watching the screen with wide eyes. Then came the moment Coda was called forward. He padded to the center of the gym stage, looked out over the crowd, and tilted his head in that curious way of his. The room erupted in applause. Several younger students wiped their eyes. A boy in the second row, Zachary's former classmate, stood and saluted quietly. Afterward, students lined up to pet Coda, who sat patiently while they took photos and whispered thanks. One girl, maybe 13, leaned close and said, "I want to work with dogs like him one day." Emily smiled and handed her a flyer for the department's Youth K-9 volunteer program. Back in the car that evening, Emily drove with the windows down and the wind rolling soft and cool. Coda sat in the passenger seat, head out the window, eyes half closed. Emily glanced at him. "You changed more than one life this time." He didn't respond, but she didn't need him to. The sky above Pine Grove glowed in soft hues of amber and violet as the sun began its slow descent behind the trees. The wind was gentle, just enough to ripple the tall grasses that edged the clearing. Beneath a towering pine, freshly cleared of brush and bramble, stood a small wooden marker, hand-carved, unvarnished, and beautiful in its simplicity. Around it, wildflowers had been planted by hand, lilac, a few daffodils, and small stones painted by children with messages like "Run free, Zach," and "You are remembered." It was not an official gravesite. Zachary's remains had been buried in his family's plot near the town cemetery. But this clearing in the woods where Coda had found him, was sacred in its own quiet way. And today, it was filled with the warmth of people who refused to forget. The Cole family stood near the marker, side by side. James Cole, tall and stoic, wore his only dark suit, the fabric stretched at the shoulders from years of disuse. His graying beard trembled slightly when he smiled. Tina Cole, smaller, with her thick curls pinned back and a silk scarf around her neck, held a framed photograph of Zachary, 17, laughing, mid-stride during a track meet. Her eyes were rimmed red but calm. There were no speeches, no podiums, just a circle of people, family, friends, teachers, students, officers, who passed quietly through the clearing, laying small tokens, standing in silence or whispering words to the wind. Emily stood a few paces away, dressed in a simple navy uniform. No vai, no weapon, just presence. At her feet, Coda sat upright but relaxed, tail brushing the pine needles gently. He seemed to understand the weight of the moment. Tina Cole stepped forward. She looked down at Coda, her eyes softening in a way only a mother could manage after heartbreak. She knelt slowly, brushing her fingers across his thick fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up, even when we did." Coda leaned forward and nudged his nose gently into her hand. Emily turned her gaze toward the forest beyond the clearing, letting the trees hold her thoughts. It had been months since the discovery, but the echoes of the search still lived in her muscles. Every inch of this place was a memory etched in scent and sound. And now, finally, it had a name. After the ceremony, people began to leave in quiet pairs. Travis Hale lingered by the edge of the trail, one hand resting on the wooden fence post, his expression thoughtful. He approached Emily, hesitating just slightly before speaking. "I put in the transfer request this morning," he said. She turned to him, eyebrows raised. "To K-9?" she asked. He nodded. "If you'll have me. I know I was less than respectful when we started, but Coda taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn." Emily smiled, small but genuine. "You'll have to unlearn a lot more before you're ready." Travis chuckled. "I figured. I've already ordered a book on scent discrimination and bought dog treats I don't know how to pronounce." Coda let out a low huff, as if mildly unimpressed. Behind them, the soft crunch of boots on grass approached. It was Chief Raymond Weller, a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, with thick silver hair and a calm that carried authority without force. He'd been a quiet supporter throughout the investigation, never loud but always watching. "Good turnout today," Weller said, eyes scanning the clearing. "The town needed it." He looked at Coda, then back at Emily. "I've made a decision." Emily raised a brow. "Sir? We're expanding the K9 unit. But not just that. I want to start a training program, instinct response protocol. Based on what Coda's taught us. Less leash, more trust. Less grid, more gut." Travis blinked. "You're turning him into a teaching model?" Weller smirked. "I'm not turning him into anything. He already is." Emily nodded slowly. "It won't be conventional. Neither is truth," the chief said simply. "And clearly, it listens better to dogs than some of us." Later that evening, Emily found herself back at the bluff overlooking the valley, the one she and Coda always returned to after long days or long cases. Below, the river curved like a ribbon of silver. Above, the sky was folding into deep blue. She sat cross-legged on the rock, the soft journal open in her lap. Her pen hovered for a moment before it moved. Final entry. Case closed. Closure delivered, not by protocol, not by hierarchy, but by one stubborn dog who refused to walk away from something no one else could see. Sometimes the rules have to break so the truth can breathe. Not every dog who breaks pattern is wrong. Some of them are leading us where we should have been looking all along. She closed the journal gently and looked down at Coda, who lay at her feet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You ready for the next one?" she asked softly. He didn't move, didn't bark, just kept watching the sun slide behind the pines, like he already knew the world would need him again soon. Sometimes the answers we seek don't come from logic, authority, or even our own strength, but through the quiet persistence of something greater. Coda didn't follow the rules. He followed truth. And through his instincts, a grieving family found closure, a town rediscovered its faith in justice, and a stubborn dog reminded everyone that miracles don't always come with a trumpet sound. They often come with 4 paws and a heart that refuses to quit. Maybe that's how God works in our lives too. Not always loud, not always visible, but always present. In the moments we listen to what others ignore, in the courage to break the pattern, and in the love that won't walk away when it matters most. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us how this story reminded you of faith, loyalty, or second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that show the quiet power of goodness. And if you believe that God still sends silent angels into this world, sometimes in the form of a dog, type amen in the comments, and may God bless every soul who watches this.